The canvas loomed like a ghost in the dim studio, its half-finished strokes screaming of a life interrupted. Elias Hawthorne, once a titan of color and light, now sat frail in his wheelchair, his gnarled hands trembling too violently to hold a brush. At 87, time was a thief, stealing his strength but not his vision. The room smelled of turpentine and regret. Sunlight filtered through a cracked window, catching dust motes that danced like forgotten dreams. Elias's eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, traced the unfinished Paintinga sprawling meadow under a turbulent sky, a memory of the land he'd loved as a boy. He'd poured his soul into it for months, but his body had betrayed him. Each stroke was a battle, each day a surrender. His nurse, Clara, a quiet woman in her 30s with eyes that held a guarded warmth, adjusted his blanket. She'd been with him for 2 years, her presence steady, her voice a soft anchor in his unraveling world. "Clara," Elias rasped, his voice a cracked whisper, "it's not done. It'll never be done." His gaze lingered on the canvas, a wound he couldn't close. Clara knelt beside him, her hands gentle but firm. "It's beautiful, Elias. It's enough." But he shook his head, a spark of defiance flaring. "It's not enough. Not yet." He reached for the brush on the table, his fingers fumbling, knocking it to the floor. Clara retrieved it, her movements patient, but Elias's frustration boiled over. "Damn it all," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I see it, Clara. I see every blade of grass, every shadow in the clouds." But these hands, he held them up, trembling, as if cursing their betrayal. Clara placed the brush back in his lap, her touch a quiet reassurance. "You've given the world so much," she said. "Let it rest." But Elias couldn't rest. The painting was his last stand, his final word to a world that had once hung on his every stroke. Decades ago, his landscapes had filled galleries, his name whispered in awe. Now, the world had moved on, and he was a relic, forgotten by all but a few loyal collectors. The meadow on the canvas wasn't just a scene, it was his childhood, his mother's laughter, the freedom of running through fields before war and loss had carved their marks. To leave it unfinished was to leave himself incomplete. That night, Clara stayed late, brewing tea in the small kitchen adjacent to the studio. Elias watched her, his mind drifting. She was an enigma, kind but distant, her life a closed book. He knew she'd lost someone, though she never spoke of it. Her hands, steady and precise, betrayed a strength he envied. As she handed him a steaming mug, he noticed a faint scar on her wrist, a thin line like a brushstroke. "Clara," he said suddenly, "have you ever painted?" She froze, her eyes flickering with something surprise, perhaps, or pain. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I'm no artist." But Elias, whose life had been spent reading faces, saw the lie. He let it pass, but the seed was planted. The next morning, he wheeled himself to the canvas, staring at the meadow's unfinished edge. The sky needed more depth, the grass more life. His hands shook as he gripped the brush, paint smearing uselessly. Clara, watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "Elias, you'll hurt yourself." "Then help me," he said, his voice sharp with desperation. He thrust the brush toward her. Paint it. Paint it as if you were," he faltered, searching for words. "As if you were me." Clara's face paled. She backed away, shaking her head. "I can't. I'm not, you don't understand." But Elias's eyes locked onto hers, unyielding. "You can. I know you can." She stood frozen, the brush trembling in her hand. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then, slowly, she stepped to the canvas. Her first stroke was hesitant, a faint green smudge on the meadow's edge. Elias watched, his heart pounding. "More," he urged. "Feel the wind in the grass. Feel the storm coming." Clara's strokes grew bolder, her hand moving with a rhythm that surprised them both. The meadow came alive under her touch, vibrant and raw. Elias's eyes gleamed with something like triumph, but also curiosity. Who was this woman who painted with such fire? As the days passed, Clara painted under Elias's guidance. He spoke in vivid bursts describing the scent of rain, the weight of a summer storm. She listened, her hands translating his words into color. But there was something in her strokes, a depth Elias hadn't expected. Her greens were wilder, her skies heavier with emotion. He began to suspect she wasn't just channeling him, she was painting her own story, one she'd buried long ago. One evening, As Clara blended a stormy gray into the sky, Elias noticed a small, deliberate shape in the corner of the canvas, a tiny figure, barely visible, standing in the meadow. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice soft but probing. Clara's brush stopped. She didn't look at him. "No one," she whispered. But her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, told a different story. Elias didn't press her, but the figure haunted him. It was a twist in their shared creation, a glimpse into Clara's guarded heart. The studio became a battleground of color and memory. Clara's strokes grew more confident, each one a bridge between Elias's vision and her own unspoken past. The meadow on the canvas bloomed with life, golden grasses swaying under a sky heavy with impending rain. Elias watched from his wheelchair, his voice a steady guide. "More shadow here," he'd say, pointing with a trembling finger. "Let the clouds feel alive." Clara obeyed, but her hands added something more, rawness, a pulse of emotion that made Elias's heart ache with recognition. He began to notice details in her work that weren't his. A patch of wildflowers, vivid and chaotic, appeared in the meadow's corner, their colors clashing beautifully with his orderly vision. The tiny figure she'd painted days ago lingered, its outline sharper now, a child with arms outstretched. Elias didn't ask about it again, but it gnawed at him. Who was Clara, really? Her quiet competence as a nurse had hidden this fire, this talent. He felt a mix of awe and unease. She was no mere caretaker, and the realization stirred both admiration and a faint, irrational jealousy. One afternoon, as rain tapped the studio's roof, a stranger arrived. The doorbell's chimes startled Clara, her brush freezing mid-stroke. Elias frowned and used to visitors. "See who it is," he said, his voice gruff. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to reveal a man in his 40s, wiry and disheveled, with eyes that darted nervously. "I'm looking for Clara," he said, his voice low, almost urgent. Clara's face drained of color. "Daniel," she whispered, stepping back as if struck. Elias's eyes narrowed. "Who's this, Clara?" he asked, wheeling closer. The man Daniel glanced at Elias, then back at Clara, his expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "I saw your name in the hospital records. I needed to see you." Clara's hands clenched, and Elias saw the scar on her wrist gleam faintly under the light. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely audible. The air grew thick with unspoken history. Elias, sensing the weight of it, gestured to a chair. "Sit," he said to Daniel, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've come this far. Speak." Daniel hesitated, then sat, his hands fidgeting. He explained in halting words. He was Clara's brother, estranged for years. They'd grown up in a small town, painting together as children, dreaming of art school. But a tragedy of fire that claimed their younger sister had shattered their family. Clara had stopped painting, blaming herself for not saving her sister. Daniel had spiraled into addiction, leaving Clara to carry the guilt alone. Elias listened, his eyes flicking to Clara, who stood rigid, staring at the floor. The tiny figure on the canvas suddenly made sense. The child in the meadow was her sister, a ghost she couldn't let go. "Why now?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. Daniel's eyes glistened. "I'm clean now. I wanted to make things right. I heard you were here, working for him." He nodded at Elias. "I didn't know you were painting again." The revelation hit Elias like a wave. Clara's talent wasn't accidental. She'd been an artist, once, before grief had buried her gift. He felt a pang of guilt for pushing her to paint, unaware of the wounds he'd reopened. But he also saw the spark in her eyes, the same fire he'd felt decades ago. "Clara," he said softly, "you didn't tell me." She shook her head, tears spilling. "I couldn't. It hurt too much." That night, after Daniel left with a promise to return, Elias and Clara sat in silence. The canvas glowed under the studio's lamplight, its meadow now a tapestry of their combined pain and hope. Elias reached for her hand, his grip weak but warm. "You're not just painting for me," he said. "You're painting for her. For you." Clara nodded, her lips trembling. "I don't know if I can keep going," she admitted. Elias's eyes hardened with resolve. "You will. We will." The next morning, Clara returned to the canvas with a new intensity. Her strokes were fierce, almost reckless, as if she were pouring years of suppressed grief into the paint. Elias watched, guiding her less now, letting her lead. The meadow grew wilder, the sky more turbulent, reflecting the storm in her heart. The tiny figure in the corner became clearer, a girl in a yellow dress, her face blurred but radiant, as if caught in a moment of joy. The studio felt alive now, humming with the energy of creation and confession. Clara's brush danced across the canvas, weaving Elias's meadow with her own memories. The painting was no longer just his, it was theirs, a shared testament to survival. Elias watched her work, his heart swelling with pride, but also a quiet fear. The canvas was nearly complete, and with it, he felt his own purpose slipping. What was an artist without a canvas? What was he without this final act? Clara, too, was changing. Her guarded demeanor softened, her movements less mechanical. Painting had cracked open something in her, and though it brought pain, it also brought light. She spoke more now, sharing fragments of her past, how she'd sketched with her sister in the fields, how their laughter had filled the air. Elias listened, his own memories of youth stirring. He began to tell her stories of his early days, of painting under starlight, of the woman he'd loved and lost to time. Their conversations wove a fragile bond, two souls finding solace in shared scars. One morning, a letter arrived, its envelope worn and yellowed. Clara found it tucked among Elias's old sketchbooks, addressed to him in a looping, feminine hand. Curious, she brought it to him. Elias's face paled as he recognized the handwriting. "Open it," he said, his voice unsteady. Inside was a single page, dated decades ago, from a woman named Lila. She'd been his muse, his love, before she'd left to chase her own dreams. The letter spoke of regret, of a life half-lived, and ended with a wish. "I hope you're still painting, Elias. The world needs your light." Clara watched as Elias's eyes glistened. "I never answered her," he said, his voice heavy. "I was too proud." He looked at the canvas, its meadow now vibrant with Clara's wildflowers and stormy skies. "This was her meadow, too," he admitted. "I painted it to remember her." Clara's hand rested on his shoulder, a silent understanding passing between them. The letter was another twist, a reminder that Elias's painting wasn't just about his past, it was about love unfinished, just as Clara's was about grief unresolved. Inspired, Clara painted with new purpose. She added subtle to chase a faint glow in the sky, a hint of a path leading beyond the meadow. Elias nodded approvingly, but his strength was fading. He slept more now, his breath shallow, his hands still. Clara worked alone some days, her brush guided by his words echoing in her mind. "Paint it as if you were," he'd said, and she did, pouring her sister's joy, her own pain, and Elias's longing into every stroke. One evening, as thunder rumbled outside, Elias woke from a nap, his eyes bright with urgency. "Clara," he whispered, "bring me to the canvas." She wheeled him over, her heart tight. He studied the painting, now nearly complete, and a slow smile spread across his face. "It's perfect," he said, "but it needs one last thing." He pointed to the tiny figure in the meadow. "Give her a shadow. Let her stand in the light." Clara hesitated, her throat tight. The figure was her sister, a memory she'd both cherished and feared. But she dipped her brush and added a soft shadow, grounding the girl in the meadow's glow. Tears fell as she worked, but they were cleansing, a release of years of guilt. Elias watched, his own eyes wet. "You've done it," he said. "You've painted us both." That night, Elias's breathing grew labored. Clara stayed by his side, holding his hand as the storm raged outside. He spoke softly, his words a mix of memory and gratitude. "You gave me this, Clara. You finished it." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "We finished it." As dawn broke, Elias's hand went limp, his face peaceful. Clara sat, stunned, the canvas glowing in the morning light. The studio felt hollow without Elias. The canvas stood complete, a masterpiece of shared grief and love, its meadow alive with color and memory. Clara stood before it, her heart a tangle of loss and gratitude. Elias's death had come quietly, but it left a void as vast as the sky he'd painted. She traced the tiny figure in the meadow, her sister, now eternal in paint, and felt a strange peace. The painting was their legacy, a bridge between their broken pasts. In the days that followed, Clara faced a choice. The canvas could stay hidden, a private monument to their journey, or it could be shared with the world. Elias's name still carried weight, and collectors had begun calling, drawn by rumors of his final work. But Clara hesitated. The painting wasn't just his, it was hers, too, and the thought of exposing it felt like baring her soul. Daniel returned, his presence steadier now. He'd been visiting regularly, rebuilding their bond. When he saw the canvas, his breath caught. "It's her," he said, pointing to the figure in the meadow. "It's Lily." Clara nodded, tears welling. "I painted her for us," she said. Daniel's eyes softened. "You're an artist, Clara. You always were." His words stirred something in Hera's spark she'd thought long extinguished. A local gallery owner, tipped off by a mutual friend, came to see the canvas. She was a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, who spoke with reverence of Elias's early work. When she saw the painting, her eyes widened. "This is extraordinary," she said. "It's not just Elias, it's something more." She offered to display it in a special exhibition, promising to credit both Elias and Clara. Clara's instinct was to refuse, but Daniel's quiet encouragement and Elias's memory pushed her forward. "He'd want the world to see it," Daniel said. "And you?" The exhibition was a quiet affair, held in a small gallery with soft lighting and hushed voices. Clara stood nervously as strangers studied the canvas, their whispers filled with awe. Critics praised its emotional depth, calling it Elias's greatest work, though some noted an unfamiliar vitality in the strokes. Clara's name, listed alongside his, drew curious glances. She felt exposed but also proud, as if she'd finally stepped into her own light. One visitor, an elderly woman with kind eyes, approached Clara. "You're the nurse who painted this?" she asked. Clara nodded, unsure. The woman smiled. "I'm Lila." Clara's heart stopped. Elias's Lila, the woman from the letter. "He wrote to me, years ago," Lila said, her voice trembling. "I came to see his last work. But this is you, too, isn't it?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "We painted it together," she said. Lila took her hand, her grip warm. "You gave him peace." "Thank you." The exhibition marked a turning point. Clara began painting again, small canvases at first, then larger ones, each a step toward healing. Daniel helped, setting up a small studio in her apartment. The meadow painting remained in the gallery, a beacon of their shared journey. Clara visited it often, feeling Elias's presence in its colors, her sister's in its light. Years later, Clara stood before a new canvas, her hands steady, her heart full. She painted a meadow under a clear sky, no storm in sight. The tiny figure was there again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside her, older, wiser, with a brush in hand. It was Clara, painting herself into the story at last.